This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting today's show is diversified agriculture agent from the Wildcat District Adaven Rohling, as she talks about parasites in goats and sheep and how people can check them for parasite loads. K-State Community Health Specialist Elaine Johannes keeps the show rolling as she reviews what farmers and ranchers need to keep top of mind as the temperature rises and they are spending time outside. Ending today's show is K-State Dairy Specialist Mike Brouk as he discusses the new order involving highly pathogenic avian influenza from the Kansas Department of Agriculture and what it means for Kansas dairy farmers. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, talking about taking care of goats and sheep this summer. And in to talk about it, we're joined by K-State Diversified Agriculture Agent from the Wildcat District, Adaven Rohling. Adaven, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Adaven, first wanting to talk about parasite control when it comes to these animals this summer, and talking about maybe not treating them until you see it being an issue.
Yes, so of course, as many sheep and goat producers probably know, late spring to early summer, they start to see more issues with parasites in their herd. And it's easy to go out there and do a blanket treatment to just treat your whole herd for internal parasites because you know you're going to have some problems with them throughout the late spring and summer. And that used to be what was recommended just a few years ago, was to do that blanket treatment. However, because of parasites becoming more resistant to dewormers and there being a limited amount of dewormers available to use for sheep and goats, it is now recommended that only the animals that show signs of internal parasites be treated for them.
And there are a few different ways to check for parasites in goats and sheep, and one of them is FEMA scoring. And what is that?
So FEMA scoring is looking at the color of the inner eyelid of a goat or sheep. And FEMA scoring is actually a trademarked term. There are specific trainings you can go to become certified to do it and receive a FEMA card that shows you the color of the inner eyelids for every scoring that you can use to compare to your sheep and goats. But to summarize it, it's a scoring of the color of the inner eyelid on a scale of 1 to 5, and 1 will be bright red. It will be that cherry red color, which unfortunately isn't that common to see in sheep and goats, but that is ideal. And then at the bottom of the scale is the 4. And 4, hopefully you never see a 4. It will be a paper white color. And then in between those, you go from that bright red to a very strong pink, to a 3 is a lighter pink, and then a 4 is that very pale pink, almost white. And this is one way to tell how heavy of a load of barber pole worms your sheep and goats have, because barber pole worms are a blood-sucking parasite. So if you have a goat that has a very heavy load of barber pole worms, for an example, they'll have a FEMA score of, say, 4. They'll have that very light pink color in their inner eyelid, and that would be a sign to treat them for barber pole worms specifically. And to look at that inner eyelid, it's a little hard to explain it on the radio, but it's called the push-pull-pop method. So you pull the bottom eyelid down with one hand, and then you use your thumb of the other hand to gently push on the top eyelid, and that will make their third eyelid on the bottom pop out so you can really see that color of the inner eyelid.
And as we're talking about internal parasites, there's also the 5-point check, and the first point for this check and checking for internal parasites, looking at the jaw.
Yeah, and the jaw is another place that you can see signs of barber pole worms. Under the lower jaw of sheep and goats, they get what's known as bottle jaw, and it fills up with fluid essentially under their lower jaw. So it can become very swollen, and sometimes in severe cases, that swelling continues up their nose and on their muzzle on those nasal passages. So that is another sign that animal has a heavy load of barber pole worms and needs to be treated.
Does it almost look like a milk goiter sometimes?
Yes, that's a great way to explain it, is it looks very similar to a milk goiter, only instead of being at the very back part of their jaw, it extends for the entire bottom jaw.
And another point for people to look at when they're checking over their animals, looking at their back.
And looking at their back, what you're specifically looking at there is body condition scoring. If you have an animal that has been eating normally, has been being fed a good diet, they've had everything that they need to meet their nutritional needs, they shouldn't be skinny, but they are skinny, that is a sign that they have internal parasites that are taking a lot out of them.
And another thing, while you're continuing to look at an animal, checking out what their hair or wool is looking like.
Yeah, so as you're doing that body condition score, you can notice what their hair coat in goats or their wool looks like in sheep. And if they have a rough hair coat, that can be a sign of needing to be treated for internal parasites. And similarly with wool sheep, if they're losing wool, that can also be a sign. And this is something that you want to use in combination with those other areas to check, because, you know, just a rough hair coat, for example, for goats could also be a sign that there's some mineral deficiency going on. But if they have a rough hair coat and they're looking a little thin, and maybe their FEMA score is a lighter pink, using all those areas combined would show that that animal needs to be treated for parasites.
And something else that can be included in that inspection of the animal, checking out their tail.
The tail is usually a more common sign in kids. And what you're looking for on the tail is signs of diarrhea. So if you haven't recently turned them out to a new pasture where there's a lot of fresh green grass, or made a change in the type of grain they get, but all of a sudden you notice that you have a few kids that have diarrhea, that can be a sign of internal parasites. And for kids and lambs, it can be a sign more specifically of coccidiosis.
And our last point in our 5-point check for people to check out is their nose.
Occasionally, you will see signs of a runny or snotty nose, and this can be signs of nasal bots specifically. So if the animal isn't showing any other signs of illness and there hasn't been drastic weather changes recently, which I know is hard to get in Kansas, but nasal bots could be a potential cause for that runny nose.
David, if someone has distinguished that they definitely have parasites in their animal, is there something that they can do to identify exactly which one it is?
Yeah, to identify the specific type or types of parasites that they're dealing with, they can take a fecal sample from that animal and work with their veterinarian. And oftentimes the vet can run that fecal sample and really dial in for them the type of parasite that they're dealing with, or that is the worst one that they're dealing with, that there's the most of in that animal. So then they can really zero in on what dewormer to use for that animal.
As we're thinking about parasites and it is getting warmer outside, also wanting to make a mention of keeping your mind on lice and ticks and flies and making sure your animals hopefully stay comfortable.
And that's another thing that you can notice when you're looking at their wool and their coat, is sometimes you might notice signs of lice and flies this time of year especially. So that would be another consideration when you're working your animals to go ahead and treat them for lice and ticks, especially if you notice signs of them this time of year.
And if people don't know what to use when treating for these parasites, what's your recommendation for them?
Yeah, so a couple that I like to use for external parasites are Silence or Permectin 2 are two products that I like to use. And there are several on the market. Those are just two that I've used and had good experience with.
If people have any questions, are they able to reach out to you, Adaven?
They can contact me by emailing me. My email address is adaven@ksu.edu, or they can call my office. That number is 620-331-2690.
Adaven, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and talk about parasites a little bit for sheep and goats.
Thank you for having me on.
That was K-State Diversified Agricultural Extension Agent from the Wildcat District Adaven Rohling. If you have questions for her about goat and sheep parasites, you can contact her by email at adaven@ksu.edu. That is ADAVEN@ksu.edu. Or you can reach her by phone at 620-331-2690. Again, that is 620-331-2690. I will put both of those in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Tuesday show thinking about what people need to be doing as hot weather gets closer. And to talk about it, we're joined by Community Health Extension Specialist Elaine Johannes. Elaine, thanks for joining us today.
Shelby, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Elaine, as we're thinking about heat, first, thinking about what the producers are wearing outside.
Yes. When I think about the heat that we all were aware of a year ago and actually what we should be expecting now, these extreme heat weather patterns issues are not just a year ago. We should be expecting them coming up fairly soon. So when the producer is out there working, it's usually during the day, those hours of morning, anytime like 9, 7 even anymore, clear into the afternoon time, 2 or 3. Those are the heat peaks in this state and around the Midwest. And so if the producer is out there working, they need to be aware that, again, they're wearing head protection, keeping that sun off of their cranium, off their head, but also thinking about some of the equipment that they would be able to get. There are cooling vests. We've seen those off on, the Interstate 70, road construction, road workers, construction workers. But I think our agricultural professionals and industry friends need to start thinking about cooling vests. So most of our equipment can be purchased in, the farm stores, construction businesses. You can order those online. Those cooling vests do work. Now, there are different kinds. Some of them have ice packs. That's probably not going to be sufficient for a producer who's out on the tractor or doing some heavy work throughout most of the day. So analyze, find out a cooling vest that has some kind of hydration going through the material. It may feel a little bit moist to the touch, but that's the whole reason why that material works. The other thing, of course, I think producers are smart. They wear bandanas, they wear scarves, they keep their back of the neck covered instead of having sun beat down on that neck or even those ears. Make sure that those are adequately covered with maybe that broad rim hat. We can't forget about sun repellent or sunscreen. We can't repel the sun, but we can sure screen it. So an SPF of maybe a 45, but definitely sweat repellent so it doesn't wash off.
And also thinking about what producers are putting in their bodies when it comes to food and water.
Oh, yeah. Preparation Shelby, preparation is the first thing to prepare that if you're going to be planning to be out there for quite a while, be drinking water the day before, not just the hour before, but the day before. Get the body hydrated with water. I don't think some of those other adult beverages are going to be called for when the heat is bearing down on us. So get that hydration, the water, make sure that there's water easily accessible. You know, one of the things that happens when you're getting too much heat, hydration is good. It keeps the blood flowing. It keeps us perspiring. That's the reason why hydration is really important. And perspiration, sweat, is to cool us down. But, you know, if our body core temperature gets to be 104 or over, then there is damage and there is definitely some health effects. So if the producer is out there, they're still drinking fluid, but they're starting to feel a little dizzy, maybe some cramping, maybe they're feeling like they need to get a drink. Get that drink. Get inside someplace that has shade. Now, true, a lot of our tractors are really equipped with air conditioning and those things, but we have to use those, right? We have to be able to turn them on and use them. So when we think about having some of those heat symptoms, don't ignore them. Take action, because if you keep persisting, and especially if you're out there alone, you're doing your work, you're doing your production alone, then the risks get greater.
There is a progression of health concerns when it comes to heat, and the first one kind of starting off with heat cramps.
Yeah. I would even say even before that, if you're starting, or if the producer or their family or their workers start to feel a little lightheaded, thirst, maybe unsteady, you know, up and down the, you know, steps of the tractor, getting around, you know, lifting, then the cramps. And then when those cramps start coming in, then that means that, yeah, we are not able to acclimate our heat core. After that comes the heat stress, heat exhaustion. That can be related to, you know, we feel faint. We sit down. We actually do faint. But then when heat stroke happens, that is really serious. It is an emergency. You don't ignore that. And you need to cool that body temperature down right away. Water's not going to do it. Usually it has to be emergency crews coming in, do some ice baths, get the person to the ER or emergency department as soon as they can.
And we'll talk about heat stroke here in just a moment. But before people get there, sometimes they experience heat cramps.
That is something that has to do with how we hydrated ourselves before. Are we getting enough water in, but also those good minerals and the things that our body, our muscles need to function. We need the enzymes. We need all the minerals for functioning. One of the things that can happen that can really be useful in preparing is acclimate ourselves. It's like that athlete, you know, who's not conditioned well. Well, golly, if we aren't conditioned well to work outside and we think we're going to go out there and do what we need to do without any kind of preparation, those heat cramps can start when we have not prepared. And when I say prepared, again, it's not that day. It's the couple of days before, like that athlete who acclimates, who knows that they need to be out there working, getting exercise for a short period of time, and then getting ready. So those muscles and all of the functionality of keeping ourselves cooled down is working. Once we acclimate to it, then we make sure then we're doing our sunscreen and we're doing our right kind of apparel and equipment. But then we still have to be aware that when that heat index is heavens, as high as what we had a year ago, and we're doing these persistent activities alone, and if we're older, if we've got some other conditions like diabetes, COPD, some other kinds of conditions that have us take prescriptions, that can affect how we tolerate heat. So we need to be smart.
And you mentioned fainting when it comes to heat exhaustion. Is that the only sign that you might be having heat exhaustion?
No. Maybe some of the listeners can actually remember when they felt like, okay, I need to get in. I need to be in some shade. I need to get help. That kind of lightheadedness, maybe some eventual dizziness that you do know you have to sit down. then if you have somebody around you, they may notice that your skin is cool to the touch and that you're looking pale and that maybe you aren't sweating enough. And that becomes a sign that, okay, we're moving from just heat exhaustion to heat stroke. When we do faint, that's a good sign. Actually, it's a survival technique that gets that blood back to our brain. What happens when we get overheated is that the blood tries to cool us down. And if we can't get cooled down, it works harder, and our heart works harder to get the blood to circulate. But if it's too hot, it can't get through, and then it can't keep our brain going. So actually, according to some of the science that has studied this, that fainting is an attempt to get our blood back to the brain. We want to faint in a safe place. So if you have to think about it, fainting is survival, but it can be damaging. And when we get to that point, no, we needed to have help well before then.
And really a time you really need help, and you've mentioned a medical emergency, heat stroke.
Yeah, absolutely. And that requires there to be emergency responders, your first responders. So when we have a producer working out there alone without any way to contact, without any help, that's not wise. That doesn't help the industry, that doesn't help their operation. You know, I think our agricultural producers are aware that heat is not good for our cattle, not good for our livestock. It's surely not good for our crops, and it's not good for us. So if the producer is not taking care of themselves, then the whole operation's at risk.
Elaine, as we round out today's conversation and are thinking about the weather getting a little bit warmer outside, what are those key things that you really want producers to keep in mind when they go outside?
Number one, be aware and prepared. Don't assume that you could get ready for this extreme heat wave or waves that we are going to anticipate. Plan a couple of days before. Second off, acclimate to it. Don't suddenly feel like I can put hours out there alone doing heavy work in the middle of some of this extreme heat. Acclimate to it, build up. Third off, make sure that you are protected. You've got adequate sunscreen, you've got the right apparel, the right equipment. And finally, be aware of yourself and your surrounding and let people know where you are out there. When it gets from heat exhaustion, then we get into heat stroke. No, that's too late. So we need to be prepared. We need to be aware and anticipate how these extreme heat situations are going to continue.
Elaine, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
That was Community Health Extension Specialist Elaine Johannes. I will link resources in today's show notes if you'd like to learn more about this topic. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's Milk Lines. In response to recent cases of highly pathogenic avian influenza detected in dairy herds, the Kansas Department of Agriculture's Division of Animal Health has introduced a crucial order to manage the movement of lactating dairy cattle across the state. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk discusses the new order and what it means for Kansas farmers.
Today I want to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning some new rules that we will be operating on for the near future when it comes to moving cattle within and into the state of Kansas. As you look at our health requirements and some of the things that have been going on in our industry, you might think about the bird flu or high pathogenic influenza A that has been circulating in some of our dairy herds around the United States. It was first detected a little over a month ago in Texas and then soon after here in Kansas. So to date, there's about 32 herds across the United States in 8 different states where this influenza has been detected in dairy cattle. Here in the state of Kansas, we currently have 4 herds that have tested positive for that. So what's in the news is that just recently, as of a couple of days ago, the health department here in the state of Kansas, the animal health department, in particular the commissioner, has issued a new order concerning the movement of dairy cattle, and in particular lactating dairy cattle, within and into the state of Kansas. In the future, as this order has already taken place and put into operation, dairy farmers, before they move lactating dairy cattle within the state or into the state, must obtain from a veterinarian a CVI, or a certification of veterinarian inspection, to ensure that these animals that are moving are not coming from a herd that has exhibited some of the symptoms associated with an infection of the influenza A virus. Those types of issues that we sometimes see in these herds where influenza has been detected would include decreased milk production, decreased rumen activity, reduced appetite, thickened or discolored milk has also been detected in some of those animals. So here's some very good advice to you as a dairy producer. Number one, if you plan to move animals within the state of Kansas that are lactating, dairy cows, you need to get your permit from your animal health veterinarian. And I would encourage you to contact your veterinarian ahead of time, because this is a pre-moval permit that you need to obtain before you actually move the cattle. And this would apply to all movements within the state of Kansas. Even if you're moving your animals from a piece of property that you own to another piece of property that you own, that is still a movement if it's not continuous with the farm. So please make sure that you contact your veterinarian concerning these new rules. How long these rules will be in place, we're not certain. That'll be up to what we see in terms of additional herds that might test positive for avian influenza. We'll just have to see how that testing goes, but it is in effect now. So any movements of lactating dairy cattle, again, within the state of Kansas or into the state of Kansas, those movements must be covered with the CVI that's issued in advance of the actual movement of the animal. Again, contact your local veterinarian, your herd veterinarian, if you have specific questions, or if you plan to move lactating dairy cattle within your operation. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And this reminder to listen to Agriculture Today anytime, go to agtoday.net, where you can listen on demand and find links to subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Stitcher Radio. You can also subscribe on your mobile device using any podcast app. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.